We think of cemeteries as these quiet, peaceful places of remembrance. But what if they're actually shouting a message? A message about power, about control, and about a claim to the land of the living, all written with the bodies of the dead. Today we're going to crack that code.
Really think about that for a second. What if every single graveyard, from some ancient burial mound to a modern cemetery down the street, is a statement, a claim that's being staked for everyone to see? It's a huge question, and the search for an answer would end up challenging the very foundations of archaeology.
All right, so here's our game plan. First up, we'll look at the big question that was puzzling archaeologists. Then, we're going to uncover a totally revolutionary hypothesis that offered an answer. We'll see how it was put into practice all over the world, how it got challenged by a new generation of thinkers, and finally, what its legacy really is for us today.
Okay, so our story starts with a really basic problem. For the longest time, archaeologists just saw burial practices as, cultural traditions. Interesting, but kind of random. But then, some people started to ask, what if they mean more? A lot more.
And this was a massive shift. For decades, a lot of archaeology was really descriptive, just carefully cataloging what was found. But in the 70s, this new movement, processual archaeology, came along and started asking why. They wanted to be more like physicists or biologists searching for universal laws that could explain human behavior, anywhere, anytime. And a key figure here, one of the leaders, was Louis Binford. He put forward this really powerful idea. How people are treated in death is basically a mirror reflecting their status and their social world in life. In other words, if you want to understand how a past society was organized, who had the power and who didn't, you don't just look at their palaces, you look at their graves.
So Benford kind of set the stage, but it was one of his contemporaries who came up with a very specific, testable, and honestly a truly revolutionary idea that would become famous.
And he was a graduate student. As part of his doctoral dissertation, a guy named Arthur Sachs laid out 8 different hypotheses about how people bury their dead. But it was the last one, Hypothesis 8, that just caught fire in the archaeological world.
Okay, so, that is a classic academic mouthful, right? But don't worry, because hidden inside all that jargon is an incredibly powerful and actually pretty simple idea. Let's break it down.
So let's put that in plain English. Imagine a family that's owned a really valuable piece of coastal property for generations. They don't just have a paper deed in a safe somewhere. They have a family cemetery right there on the hill overlooking the water. That cemetery isn't just for mourning. No way. It's a permanent physical statement that tells everybody this land is ours. Our ancestors are buried in this soil. The cemetery itself becomes the title deed, written in stone. That's the core idea.
Sachs's hypothesis was a total game changer, but it wasn't the final word. Another brilliant archaeologist, Lynn Goldstein, took a look and realized this powerful idea needed one crucial tweak. See, Sachs's original idea was basically a two-way street. He said if a group claimed land through their ancestors, they would always have a formal cemetery. And if you found a formal cemetery, it always meant they were claiming land. But Goldstein, she refined this. She argued it's more of a one-way street. A formal cemetery is strong evidence for those ancestral claims, for sure. But a society might use other things, like, say, oral histories or monuments, to make the exact same point. So the presence of a cemetery is a huge clue, but its absence doesn't automatically mean a claim didn't exist.
Okay, so with this new, refined idea, which everyone started calling the Saxe-Goldstein hypothesis, archaeologists suddenly had this powerful new lens to look at the past, and they started using it everywhere. And the range here is just amazing. All of a sudden, those giant megalithic tombs in Europe weren't just mysterious stone structures anymore. They were seen as markers for ancestral farming lands. Burial grounds along Australia's Murray River became evidence of territorial control over vital water resources. Archaeologists argued that as societies in North America settled down and started farming, boom, formal cemeteries emerged to lock down claims to the best land. It was even used to look at classical Athens and Rome, and more recently, how people in Kenya were using new cemeteries to legitimize land claims. This thing wasn't just a theory, it was a tool that seemed to unlock secrets all over the globe. But you know how it is in science and philosophy, no good idea goes unchallenged for long. Just as the Saxe-Goldstein hypothesis was becoming this cornerstone of archaeology, a new school of thought popped up to question its very foundations. This new movement, called post-processualism, basically pushed back hard against the whole idea of finding universal scientific laws for human behavior. They argue that humans aren't just systems reacting to stuff like environmental pressures. We have beliefs, we have ideologies, we have complex motivations that you just can't boil down to a simple formula.
See, the entire Saxe-Goldstein hypothesis rests on one really big assumption, that what you see in a grave is an honest reflection of reality. But the critics came along and asked a devastatingly simple question. What if it isn't? What if a burial is a performance, or maybe even a lie?
An archaeologist named Ian Hodder was a leading voice here, and he argued that funerals are theater. They're a chance for society to present an idealized version of itself. Maybe a family that's actually losing power gives its leader an incredibly lavish burial to project an image of strength that they don't really have. The burial record, he said, could be a form of propaganda, not a scientific readout.
And this quote from another critic, Mike Parker Pearson, really gets to the heart of it. He felt the hypothesis was just too materialistic, too functional. It reduced all the complex spiritual and emotional reasons people care for their dead down to a simple calculation about who gets the best farmland. It left no room for belief, for love, for fear of the dead, or for the rich, messy tapestry of human culture.
So, what we have here is this big intellectual battle, right? On one side, you've got a powerful, scientific-looking law. On the other, a critique that says it misses the very essence of what makes us human. So, who won? Well, the answer is a little more interesting than a simple victory for one side. The critics were right. It wasn't some universal ironclad law that applied to every single society in history. But the core idea was just so powerful that it couldn't be thrown out. Instead, it was absorbed. It evolved from being a rigid rule into a foundational piece of archaeological thinking. I just love this quote from James Whitley. He said it became part of the theoretical unconscious. He's basically saying that even the archaeologists who critiqued the hypothesis couldn't help but think about the connections it made. The idea that ancestors, land, and power are all linked through burial became so ingrained that it was just part of how they did their work, whether they consciously cited the hypothesis or not. And this just shows its staying power. By 2020, the idea had gone from a revolutionary theory to a contested law to something that's now described as just archaeological common sense. I mean, of course, you should consider the link between where people are buried and claims to land. It's now the starting point for asking questions, not the final answer. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, the Saxe-Goldstein hypothesis completely revitalized the whole field of funerary archaeology, turning it into a hotbed of debate and discovery. It permanently focused researchers' attention on that critical triangle: ancestors, legitimacy, and power. And even though it's not the simple key that unlocks the whole past, it gave us a foundational question that continues to guide archaeologists to this day. And that brings us to one last thought. In our world, where land can be digital real estate and resources can be data or influence, what are our formal disposal areas? If future archaeologists were to study our social media memorials, our online tributes, our digital legacies, what would they conclude about what we value and who in our society is laying a claim to power? Something to think about. If you enjoyed cracking this historical code with us, do us a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Daily Wonders. We've got so many more fascinating ideas to uncover together. Thanks for watching.